How's it going, Lou?
Good, Tim. How about you?
I'm doing well. Just a heads up, this thing auto starts recording the second I start this meeting. So
Okay.
your bribery attempts limited to phone calls.
Listen, I know that you're below reproach, so you know. My. So the fun began on Monday, huh? With the legislature.
Oh yeah. I love doing bill review because I'm always it's so funny because as in a general sense, I'm always like, we need less bureaucracy. We need to help people more direct service, more action. And then I go through these bills and I'm like, I love this. I love this. I love this. This is a great idea. And I'm like, oh no.
Yeah. So how many folks do the bill review over there?
I don't know. I think they assign it. The government relations team does a big chunk of it. And maybe Tanisha is actually on the government relations team and she could probably give you an actual answer. But I think they kind of assign them to anyone, once you hit a certain level, anyone who may tangentially be impacted by that bill. They're kind of like, hey, take a look at this and tell us what you think. And then they use that to kind of guide priorities and flags and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, DCVS, the range was so big. We basically anything that referred to carbon-based life form, we would review. So so yeah, it was pretty crazy. But there were very few bills that didn't at least get somebody looking at it. So.
Hold on, I've got people joining the Zoom. Give me a second. Hello, Jamie. So we've got I'm doing well. Just I got a nice long 12-hour day ahead of me today.
Oh goodness, I thought you were going to say you got a nice long 12-hour night's sleep.
No, it's the opposite.
Sorry to hear that.
No, it's good. It's self-inflicted. Got a bunch of union stuff after work that I've got to.
Union? Are you a union steward?
I'm actually the OHCS vice president.
Wow.
And part of the bargaining committee. So, yeah.
That's a lot of work. Good for you.
Yeah. I'll limit my comments because this is a recorded conversation. Yeah. But, yeah, so we've got a pretty packed schedule today. Hello, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah.
Hey, guys. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So we've got a really packed schedule today. As always, I'll give us a few minutes to kind of kick it off. But as you may or may not see, we've got Director Bell with us today, who's going to open up with a couple comments. And then from there, okay. So that'll be amended on the agenda. It was kind of a last minute thing. So, but as always, we'll start with my welcome. Actually, we'll wait 3 minutes after. My apologies, Andrea. I like to let people trickle in at their own pace. But once we do that, I'll do kind of just very quick welcomes. Andrea, Director Bell will then make some comments, maybe solicit a little kind of just very brief feedback. Then we've got Lou Savage here, who was the facilitator for the Ag Labor Housing Task Force, the Governor's Ag Labor Housing Task Force. We have some ag worker study updates and kind of timeline pieces from Jamie. We're going to have Martin talk a little bit about the Ag Worker Housing Tax Credit and its utilization, and kind of just a very brief overview. Then we have kind of the kind of reimagining the ag worker housing facilitation team, which is kind of an ongoing discussion at this point. And then we're going to adjourn. During this meeting, we're not going to have any public comments. There's not going to be a public comment period. So yes. So yeah, one more minute and then we will we'll kick this thing off. And this meeting is already being recorded. If anyone is joining late, this meeting is auto starts recording the second I start it. All right, so we're at 3 after, so I'm gonna kick us off. So first, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. This is our first meeting of the Ag Worker Housing Facilitation team in 2023. I hope you all had a very wonderful and restful holiday season, New Year's, and were able to celebrate Martin Luther King Day earlier this week. We've got, as I mentioned before, a pretty packed schedule. So I'm really excited to kind of engage. And there was a last minute adjustment to the agenda. We have Director Bell here, who's going to make some comments about this group and solicit some very brief feedback. So without further ado, Director Bell, do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thanks for that, Tim. Good morning, everybody. It's really, really good to be in virtual community with you this morning. I see a few familiar names and faces, but for those of you I have not had a chance to meet, Andrea Bell, she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director here at Oregon Housing and Community Services. And it's always an interesting thing when you are noted as the person throwing off the agenda a bit. So I appreciate that introduction, Tim. I'll have to get back at you later for that. Well, first off, just much appreciation for you all letting me crash the agenda for just a few minutes, and I will commit to being just to keeping your time for just a few minutes. I wanted to just in the space of our shared values, in the space of our partnership and our collective work that this body, that this collective has been pursuing, I wanted to just get a couple thoughts out there that I had been on my mind as I had been talking with my team. And so by no means do we need to solve anything by the end of this conversation, but it feels only appropriate as our partners in building something together in service to the people that we serve, that we always make room for open 100 conversations. And so that's really the prism by which I am showing up today. So recognizing that we as an agency, similarly to each of you as partners, we are continuing to focus on housing across the full continuum for ag workers who are living in and are looking forward to continuing to do this work together. I know that as I look across the virtual screen here, I know that each of you hold a set of expertise and your own personal passion to ensure that farm workers are not only stably housed, but are safely housed. And we recognize there are a number of solutions and strategies that we can get in service to that shared goal. And candidly, I believe that this body has such an opportune set of power and set of opportunities in front of us. And I want to make sure that as a state agency, as a government agency, because our pure existence for being is to serve the people, all people of Oregon, and in this space, we are here really to improve the quality of lives for farm workers. I want to make sure that we are doing our part as your partners to make sure that this space is continuing to be of service to you. And so I want to make sure that because we are building something together, I want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence to take a moment to not only reflect, but to take stock of this space, to ask ourselves some critical questions, and quite frankly, be open to some feedback. And so my hope is that we can collectively both get your feedback, get your thoughts as to what are some opportunities that we can have within this group as we forge progress together forward. What are the opportunities that we have to both celebrate and uplift the progress that we've made, to really understand what can we do differently within the space that we have, not only theoretically, but in the way that we work. How is it facilitated? How is it structured? Do our partners feel like there are true opportunities for power sharing and decision making? What do we need to do differently? Where do you need us differently? Where do we need to show up in this space differently? And to really dig into whether we are directionally aligned, and if we're not, where do we need to make those pivots rather than continuing to shoehorn forward just for the sake of moving forward. I think moving forward is a really great thing. And we also want to make sure that we are moving in the right direction as defined by all of you as our partners, recognizing that OHCS is at the table, but we are not the only person at the table. And so we want to continue to be responsive to that. And so from my seat, as the executive director of this agency, it is of high importance in all the spaces that we serve in and that we hold, that we continue to take stock and hold feedback. That is our commitment and that is our responsibility to you. And so we serve the people of Oregon through our partners. And so we need to continue to take stock of the spaces that we hold and ask some critical questions of our partners. And so again, this is not for something that we want to solve today, but I do want to make sure that you all know where my mind is at, and that is what is top of mind for me. And so my hope is that bringing that into the space doesn't slow anything down, but rather my hope is that we can repurpose some of the already allotted time that we have with you to ask some critical questions, to listen to your feedback and perspective, so that as we move forward, that we can continue to not only have a space, but build a space where we are collectively, where you are getting what you need out of this space, and give us some feedback around how the space is working. The way that the agenda is crafted, the way that we are governed together. I know that we are intending to have other state agencies present. Who's missing from the table that we can help garner their presence? And so again, I recognize that's a little bit of a shift from the agenda, but it had been top of mind and I wanted to get that in front of you. I'm happy to take any early and initial thoughts and feedback up to and including AB, that is a horrible idea. We actually don't want to do that at all. I'm happy to receive that as well. But I do want to just make sure that you all know that is something that I have a deep interest in and we have a deep interest in. And my hope is that we can forge some time together to really take stock of this space and optimize it, make it work, dig into what's not working, and reimagine ourselves as we need to and as defined by our partners. So with that, I will yield back for just a moment to see if there's any initial thoughts or feedback. And if not, you can expect that we will want to dig into some of this and build this out with you as defined with you as well. So maybe Tim, I'll pause for a moment and just see if there's any reflections or questions on that.
Thank you, Andrea. This feels like a wonderful beginning, a new re-beginning that we had been talking about. One possibility is that in the past, we've worked well with subcommittees. And so this might be an opportunity to think about a subcommittee to really initiate the process that you've outlined here. And thank you for your commitment.
Absolutely, Karen, I appreciate that. And your feedback is duly noted. We look forward to it.
Thanks, Andrea. This is Peter from CASA of Oregon.
Morning, Peter.
Appreciate your attendance here today, and thank you for the conversations that we've had about the farm worker facilitation team and other issues. I think with the upcoming legislative session right now in place, and the fact that the farm worker tax credits are up for renewal, I think it's really incumbent upon us to, and I sent an email to Tim kind of highlighting some changes that I'd like to see within the task force or within the facilitation team. But on the top was, a celebration of the work that's been accomplished to date. I really think we need to show legislators in the world the great work that we all have done, and that includes the department. You guys have financed, thousands of units using farm worker tax credits and other sources. And I really want this body to be able to see what those accomplishments are and help embellish them if they need to be, and get the word out there. So I want to thank you for coming today, and hoping that, at the very least, for something that could happen right away, is identify everything that we've done, and let's get something out there in the public that really promotes it. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Peter. I think that's a really important point around fully maximizing the moment that we are in terms of elevating the work that this body has helped inform and the progress that this body has helped push forward meaningful progress in. And so that is something absolutely that we can do and we are committed to. And I think if this body is supportive of moving forward, that I would say that is something that certainly for our next bit of time together, or if we need a supplementary time together, we certainly can bring a broader set of folks to help support that and make sure that whatever we're celebrating and uplifting is we're all seen and represented in that. So very much aligned with that. Hey, Meg.
Morning, and Director Bell, thank you for being here. I think it's important that from time to time you visit us and let us know that you are supporting us. And the fact that you are here, it shows a lot. I agree with what Peter and Karen say. I have one comment. I want to bring more people to the table, definitely, but we must bring the right people. We need to engage with those organizations that are really going to help us to move forward. I have to say, sometimes I feel like we bring too many people. How is that, you guys say? Too many cooks in the kitchen, and we don't make real advancements or policy decisions. And I think that goes to what Karen say. We used to have these subcommittees that will take charge on some areas, and I think we should bring back to the table. Again, appreciate your presence in here, and as well as Chelsea.
Wonderful, very much appreciation for that, Megan. I think what I want to uplift and just recognize out of that is growth in more tables, growth in more seats at the table certainly is generally a positive thing, but really wanting to be diligent around inviting some voices and some presence and expertise to the table, perhaps that is not here or lifted. And I would love to see and hear how what you all want to see from that, so we can be collectively responsible for that in our shared responsiveness. Lori, go for it.
Hi, nice to meet you. I haven't met you yet, and it's very nice to meet you and really appreciate your joining us today. And I guess I just want to say just a couple of things. And I think Peter's right about taking a moment to celebrate the great work. And I have probably the closest contact with, some of Meg's units here in Salem, Colonia Libertad. And I just think it's worth noting just like the intangible results that come out of providing safe, affordable, community-based housing for agricultural workers. Just the sense of community and the support for families and kids is tremendous and amazing and invaluable. And I think that one, Meg's right about it matters kind of who's coming and why they're coming. And I think some of that has to do with defining goals, like what are the things that we're trying to achieve. And what I want to make sure that is kept as part of this group is that, you know, recently we've been focusing on migrant housing, which is absolutely a need that needs to be addressed. But community-based housing is a huge part of what this group does. And I think, and I would argue that kind of more resources need to kind of be directed towards that. And so, and maybe that could be reflected in the goals that are set. And I do just want to also want to point out and give a thank you to Jamie and her team's efforts that the study is awesome. I think we can learn a lot from it, and we should use that as part of kind of the moving forward. And one of the pieces of moving forward I just want to suggest is, in the past, we've kind of talked about pilot projects, and there was actually a committee about creative problem solving, and it didn't go forward. And there's reasons for that. I'm not saying every project needs to go forward, but I think that that's the way for creativity to happen, is trying things and maybe doing smaller kind of pilot projects and just see if they work and see if they're worth replicating. But I think that this group can be part of that creative problem solving. And so not wanting to lose kind of the work that's been done in the past and try to connect it with where we're going. So thanks for your time.
Wonderful. Thanks for your time, Lori, and good to meet you virtually. And I want to just uplift one of the things that you that was reflected in your sentiment, which is that our economies and our communities are stronger when everybody has access to their basic needs, to which housing is absolutely fundamental. And I think, just on, you know, a personal note, my grandfather was a farm worker, and so this is very much something that the topic of housing was a common conversation to as far back as I can remember growing up as a kid. And so much appreciation for that. And I want to just also uplift the sentiment, and I think the sentiment that was sort of carried in some of your colleagues' comments around being thoughtful around those voices at the table, uplifting the wins because they're there. And I think one of the things that's really important is telling those stories. I think abstracts and numbers are one piece of importance, but I think we're also talking about people and families and quality of life, to which I think those stories are so important, particularly now in this moment. And so I want to just appreciate that. And I would just say, for the folks in the room from Team OHCS, we should very much take that back as an actionable item in terms of uplifting those areas of shared progress. Anything else? Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands or inquisitive looking faces like they might hit the mute button really soon. So I will move out of your way. Thank you for letting me crash the party for just a few minutes. Tim, thank you for letting me be an inconvenience on the agenda for just a few minutes. To all of our partners, thank you for laboring in love. Thank you for your sweat equity. Thank you for the commitment, for continuing to show up. And I would just say, please see this as an open door and an invitation to responsibly and constructively give us feedback as well. We are your partners, and so we need to be responsive to you. And I look forward to constructing and improving the space and the time that we have together as defined by each of us. So I'll turn it back over to you, Tim.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Director Bell, for coming today. And we all really appreciate it, and your continued leadership under the new governor and all the fun that it entails. Awesome. All right. Moving along, I wanted to have Lou Savage speak today. He's so graciously agreed to join us, even though he is no longer a public civil servant, to talk about the Ag Labor Housing Governor's Task Force. Lou facilitated that entity, and he's just going to talk a little bit today about the process, the decision-making process, kind of what was the kind of created this, and how that works. So yeah, Lou, do you want to take it away for us?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. I do see a few familiar faces out there, although a bunch of folks who I haven't met before. Just so you know, I worked for state government for about 15 years. Prior to that, I'm a lawyer by trade. I was a legal aid lawyer for almost 20 years, did private practice, ran a congressional office, ran several state agencies. And on my way out the door, Governor Brown asked me to facilitate this task force on agricultural labor housing. And really what I wanted to focus on was what the task force was and what it wasn't. Governor Brown formed the task force primarily to bring state agencies together, agencies that had some responsibility that touched on farm housing. And really the catalyst was OSHA's review of its rules on standards for on-farm housing. It became pretty clear that although OSHA had regulatory responsibility, there were a lot of agencies that touched on farm housing. And again, from the outset, this task force focused on farm housing. The governor felt that state agencies needed to get together to discuss issues that crossed agency jurisdiction, look at some big picture issues. And although agencies definitely talk to each other, the governor really believed that all the agencies that had some responsibility got down together in the same room at the same time and discussed some of these issues. So this was an interagency task force. It was not a roundtable. It was not a public roundtable. It was never intended to be a public roundtable. It had opportunities for public input. The meetings were public. The task force heard presentations from worker advocates, at least a couple of whom are on the call right now, and comments from the growers community as well. And there were invitations, ongoing invitations for folks to make presentations if they wanted to do that. I really felt that it was a useful discussion over the course of 5 months. And again, this was a look at on-farm housing by state agencies with comments and opportunities for feedback from the bigger community. So this was a 5-month effort. The timing was not great for anyone. Worker advocates were doing a lot of work during the summer with outreach to the worker community, and growers, frankly, were really busy with crop production. So it was not a great time. In retrospect, it would have been nice to have this not be in the summer, but it was just the way things developed, particularly with OSHA rulemaking. The governor asked that the task force make some recommendations by November. So we were on a really quick time frame. And so there were really 3 basic recommendations that the task force made. One was that agencies should continue their discussions and have a process that coordinated referrals, identify serious health and safety concerns, and just to continue to unpack some of the issues that were just starting to be discussed during the task force meetings. Another recommendation, was to support the proposal that Housing and Community Services had for a new grant program that was dedicated specifically to on-farm housing. I believe it's a $5 million excuse me, yeah, $5 million initial investment, if I'm right, Tim, is that right? Yeah. And then the third was to continue the efforts that the task force started to create a more coordinated approach to these issues. And because the agricultural workforce facilitation team actually has statutory responsibility for looking at some of these issues, it was the likely home for future discussions on these issues. So really, that's it in a nutshell. Happy to answer questions and appreciate being able to talk to folks.
So I know Meg asked if you can explain how the work you did impacted community-based housing. And I also just want to say, Karen, I should say, someone asked for closed captioning. I'm trying to figure out how to get that on Zoom. But yeah, Lou, Meg just wanted to know how it would impact community-based housing, the task force, the governor's task force.
How it would impact again, what?
How it would, how the work you did impacted community-based housing, if at all.
It didn't. It was not part of the discussion. I mean, you know, it's a little bit of editorial comment from me. There certainly is a lot of debate as to the future of on-farm housing. You know, how much resources should be put into it, particularly, you know, new construction. But the Governor Brown felt very strongly that there is on-farm housing. OSHA has responsibility for creating standards for that on-farm housing. And the question is what you do with that on-farm housing that currently exists. One could take the approach that you just let it sit and you don't create opportunities for improvements. Governor Brown did not feel that way.
Thank you. And Lou, thank you for the work that you did. I think on-farm housing definitely have a place, a very important place. And I asked that question because I don't see many CDCs, Karen or anybody, correct me if I'm wrong, that participate in this group anymore. And I think, I just think that it's because we don't find a place that we talk about our issues. The governor has the racial justice advisory committee, the on-farm worker housing. We talk about all kinds of housing. There is very few places where we can talk about farm worker housing, community-based providers, and the impact that we made in this in this arena. And that goes back to my comment is who do we invite to the table and who is the right people. I have to say I sometimes felt like I'm here, but the topics that we talk are not really impacting the work that we do as a CDCs. I might be wrong. If anybody wants to correct me, it's okay. You know, I'm always open to learn, but I'm extremely worried that we are not even fighting what we need to fight. I shouldn't say fight because we don't want to fight more, but we are not putting attention on the issues that affect us in creating more community-based housing, communities, not just units or a place to sleep. To the point that, you know, we left the Oregon Farm Worker Tax Credit to be included as the small NOFA and not stand on its own. I understand that that might be changed in the future. I don't know yet, but those are the things that I don't think we are putting too much attention. I just want to call, you know, everybody on that, and make just kind of like a space for us as well. Thank you.
I mean, I'm not sure I'm the right person to respond to any of that, because I know that Tim and you know his agency are looking to as he said, reimagine the work of this group. I think that the value that the task force had, again, because it was an interagency task force, the value was to bring agencies to the table in a forum where they could discuss issues as a group that really hadn't been discussed as a group before. So really, it was just a sort of a jumping off point, which hopefully will continue. The other, you know, the broader issues that you mentioned, I totally understand. And it really is, you know, what Tim and I did at the end of 2022 was basically do the handoff. You know, the handoff from the task force on again just this very limited issue of you know on farm housing, and again we didn't discuss the community-based housing issue at all, because I think it was anticipated that this group, the group that's here right now, that that's your responsibility, and you know that's what I think we'll be moving forward. So. Okay, happy to answer any other questions.
So Lou, I wanted to thank you for your work. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you. It's been a long time. And also just, you know, to make, you suggested that the work continue between the Agricultural Labor Housing Task Force and this group. And I heard the department also take interest in that. And so I actually took the initiative and went and talked to a couple of representatives about putting that into statute to include those other agencies at the table, because this is a statutorily defined group that we have here. So I've got some responses back from OACS and talking to some of the other agency folks and whatnot. I think one of the things that we're trying to figure out is, you know, do we need a new funding source? I mean, CASA has supported community-based housing and on-farm housing for a long time. We used to do a lot of labor camp rehab. We don't anymore. And we know the growers have availed themselves of the tax credit over the years. And so, you know, some of the questions we've got, and this isn't a question for you, Lou, but just kind of more an observation is, why aren't the farmers able to use these tax credits? And, you know, we often hear they don't make money. I understand that. And there's a transferability of the credit to other taxpayers. So I want, you know, before we get too far into creating new funding sources, let's make sure the funding sources we got are doing the job. So thanks again, Lou, for your work, and best of luck to you.
So just a brief comment on what you said. I appreciate the thoughts. We did, and this probably needs to be teased out a little bit more, but we did hear from several growers, particularly smaller growers, not the huge agricultural interests, but the smaller growers, that the tax credit system is very cumbersome for them, and kind of dive into that, I think, if that's helpful. And then and Tim, you could jump in on this as well. The issue of tax credit was not particularly helpful for someone who is not making any money, who basically has a balance sheet that is sideways for several years. And I don't know, Tim, if you want to jump in on any of that.
Yeah, I guess just and I see Jeff and Nicole have their hands raised, so I'll just kind of speak very briefly. But you know, we know that there is this need. we know that Oregon OSHA is going to be updating these house rules and that, or the housing rules. And in order to kind of ensure that happens, that we have to provide a resource for the growers. And if they're saying it's too onerous, that they're saying it's difficult to use, I mean, I think we should listen to them. And that was kind of the guiding kind of thought around that. And I think overall, what I've heard from everyone is there is a need for increased resources and funding for farm workers, wherever that may be. And part of that proposal was making the ag worker housing tax credit completely community-based, which would free up, I think, 15% of that total amount. And then setting aside or creating a new grant program for these growers. So, and we can also talk a little bit, and this is, I'll just say this one thing, and then I'll have Jeff and Nicole go. We do have some updates around the Department of Revenue and how those tax credits are kind of being utilized. So yeah, well, when we get to that point, we can talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, I guess Jeff, do you want to chime in?
Why, sure. I'm Jeff. I'm the executive director of the nursery and greenhouse industry. So appreciate the opportunity to just give you a couple observations. These are more global. Nicole is far more of an expert than I would ever be. But a couple of things. I mean, you're correct. Tax credits are certainly the thought and priority that you placed on trying to provide tax credits, I think, is helpful. But I would tell you that it is true. Farm economics would tell you that they're land rich and cash poor, and oftentimes will not show a profit. So the tax credit mechanism in and of itself on the back end is harder, just so you know, for people to utilize it more fully. That's why I think a grant type of style would be better. But again, someone has to administrate it. And so I'll leave that to others. The other, I'd say it's a complicating factor. When we talk about on-farm housing, a lot of these lands are on EFU land. And so it's really difficult, land use wise, to put housing on perfectly good farmland. Now, that's why I'm interested in trying to see how we can beef up surrounding areas. So the commute for workers, there's opportunities for workers to live close by to where they work. But once you start going down the land use side of the equation, I'm just telling you, it is very touchy. And so I just want to let you know that there are landmines out there, some of them which we placed, because we don't want land converted. So I just wanted to point that out, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Nicole, did you want to go?
Yes, I will. And sorry for the wobbly background, but I'm in the Capitol trying to be in 3 places at once. So I'm also a little bit quiet. Thank you, Jeff, for your comments. I think that anytime anybody refers to you as an expert, you get very nervous to have to talk after that. So I am absolutely not an expert on on-farm housing. But I am Nicole Mann. I represent the Columbia Gorge fruit growers, and that is the area where 2/3 of the on-farm housing is located. So this is a conversation that we are strongly involved in and care a lot about. I just wanted to touch on some of the questions that I think Peter had raised, and Lou and Tim's response is spot on of what they've heard from our housing providers. We just don't show a profit. Trust me, we would really like to show a profit, but in order to use the tax credit as it's currently designed, we have to have that profit. And we don't. And so that is the main reason why it's not being utilized by a lot of our members. Some of our members are able to utilize it. And when I've talked with them about why they don't think others do, or in what ways they're able to utilize it, I hear a lot about how cumbersome and time consuming and a little bit confusing the application process is to get that tax credit. And so for them, we represent a lot of small farms. So they are the owner, the farmer, the bookkeeper, the HR person, the compliance person, they're all the things. And so when they look at how much tax credit they could get, over a certain amount of time compared to the time that they would have to take to figure out how to do it, the math just doesn't add up. And so those are really the two main reasons that they're not utilizing it. I think that's a really hard decision for some of our providers as they're looking at how this is going to go forward with OSHA regulations. One of the reasons that we're supportive of the recommendations that are coming is that split of making this into a grant program as our providers are looking at the new OSHA regulations coming that are going to take some strong financial investment from our housing providers, and any assistance that they can get to help them come into compliance with those new OSHA regulations, and in some cases even go above and beyond them with help from the state, is a really good incentive for them to be able to do that. You know, I have a lot that really want to put air conditioners in, or if they really want to update their electrical grid, for example, but that is a huge financial investment. And if we could get some assistance, I think that they would be more inclined to go above and beyond those regulations. So that is the short version. If anybody's really interested in additional feedback from our members, at least, as to why they don't take the tax credit, I'm happy to have a one-on-one meeting and bring in some of our growers.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Nicole. I guess, Lou, is there anything else you wanted to cover about the process, or just how wonderful I was to work with?
Well,
and I was your favorite person.
Yeah, that of course goes without saying, Tim. I mean, one I guess observation that I guess I really want to make to this group is there is really an opportunity for dialogue, even though there are a lot of disagreements between, you know, growers and advocates, workers and worker advocates. There are also a lot of places where there is agreement. And so to the extent that this group can be a place where issues can be discussed and hashed out, I think you folks should really take advantage of that. So, you know, I mean, at some point when you disagree, you just have to either agree to disagree, or you take it to another forum for a resolution. But I just think that there are opportunities to work things out with, you know, people. Assume good faith on the part of people, even though they may have a different perspective than you do, and use this as an opportunity to hash out some issues. So anyway, thanks Tim for the opportunity. I am going to sign off now.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Lou. Oh, Jeff, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, just to be clear, this is not a matter of liking the program or not liking the program. It's a matter of the ag economy. And so honestly, when we talk amongst the Aggies, we say, how can we make these things work? Workers are critical to everyone's success, but sometimes we have the same conversation over and over, and they say, do this tax credit. And if we say we don't, it really doesn't work for us. And here's why. I just want you to know that we're not being recalcitrant here. I mean, it's just we're trying to find ways that we can get to the same shared goal. But I just want to, you know, I respect Brother Savage, and I just sometimes there are trigger words that happen that then I have the impulse control of a refrigerator magnet and can't help but just clarify. So thank you. I just wanted to throw that.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that I didn't deliver the message that I wanted to, which was in fact, there are lots of opportunities for agreement. That's, you know, Jeff, actually, I think, Jeff, I think you and I are on the same page. So, okay.
That scares me, by the way, Lou.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you again, Lou. So excellent. We are chugging right along. And next up, I know is a topic that everyone has been kind of bringing up from point to point. It was brought up, I think, kind of tangentially earlier in this meeting. It's been kind of what feels like long delayed kind of process. You know, the ag worker housing study initiated, I believe, in 2019. So here to provide some kind of updates is Jamie, kind of what she has been up to at the kind of tail end of last year, what the timelines on the study are, and yeah, Jamie, why don't you take it away?
But before Jamie kicks it off, can I just talk just super quick about the study? Jamie, do you mind? Okay. Hey y'all, it's good to see you. It's Chelsea Bunch, and I'm the you see her pronouns and director of the our Equity, Diversity, Inclusion office. And I just wanted to jump in before Jamie started because I started with the agency in 2017, at the end of 2017. And in 2018, this was quickly identified as a project that I had the pleasure of holding and working on. And Tim, you're right, we did start in 2019. It has been a long road. And I know I talked a little bit about this last meeting at our December meeting, all the navigation of delays with COVID. We talked a little bit about the IRB, Institutional Review Board. But we are winding down. I know that we shared with you all the study mid last year, probably about March or April, I believe it is. And took some time to go back out at the suggestion really of several folks in this group. Thought it was a really great idea. And certainly it's not something that we had thought about when we first started building the scope, to go back out and to really hear from the farm workers who were a part of the study on how the study actually landed for them. So that took some additional time. And so we really feel like it's a really great opportunity to bring the study back and have Jamie kind of just talk through what's been going on, but then also give folks an opportunity to just share any last feedback before the end of this month. We certainly won't spend time to do that today, but we will have some opportunity to hear from you all, just some kind of overall feedback, so that we can prepare for a final draft, which will be, I think it's pretty safe to say, I think we should be able to finalize this next month. So, Jamie, I just want to thank you for all of your work, your diligence. I think specifically around centering research justice, right? So that communities that we are talking to have a right to know what we are saying, and have a right to share their feedback and to share their expertise and their lived experience. And I think that that's been really a core tenet of the work that you and your team have led this study with. You haven't given up despite all of the delays, and it's been really wonderful to work with you. And so just sharing gratitude for you as you enter in to the conversation, but just wanted to, didn't want to throw it to you without just acknowledging how much work has gone into this study. So without further ado, Jamie Stamberger.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for those kind words. I am here to bring the study back, as Chelsea said, but we're still here. We're still working on the farm worker housing study, and we are really close to being done and getting that. We're really looking forward to finalizing the report with y'all's input and getting it out there to be public and to be used by all of us. So I'm here just to give you an update. As Chelsea mentioned, since we last met, we took your good advice and facilitated a farm worker review of the draft study report. That draft study is 200 pages long, as y'all might remember, and so that was an undertaking. So it took us a while to do that. And I'll be sharing some of those findings with you today from the farm worker review. And then we're going to give you some instructions as well for providing your own feedback so we can finalize it as soon as we can so we can all use it. So what I am going to attempt to do right now is share my screen. Actually, one second.
Do you have screen share capability?
I don't know yet. Hold on.
What?
I just
Oh,
made
here.
you a co-host.
Oh,
please.
ooh, co-host. Fancy. Yes, great. Okay, so this is a document and you all have access to this. Tim shared it out as an attachment to the invite for this meeting, the agenda for this meeting. And so I'm going to go through with you the summary of the, well, not really the whole thing of the farm worker review findings. And you'll notice there's a lot of yellow highlighting and there will be little blue notes here and there. Your version that you have access to will not have this. This is just for our kind of a guide for us to review today. But in order to facilitate this farm worker review, OHCS had the full study draft, the 200 pages translated into Spanish. So that took a while. It was a big undertaking and it was really cool actually to see something translated as a draft in that way. I feel like translation is sometimes and often left for last when something is finalized. But in order to facilitate that review, we went ahead and translated, or OHCS translated the full study draft. And the Latina liaisons who had conducted the interviews for the housing study held in-person small group review sessions with farm workers who had been interviewed as part of the study at comfortable locations that they selected in each county. The liaisons recruited 3 farm workers per county, and they held multiple review sessions with each group. So most of the counties did 3 different 2-hour sessions to get through most of the study together. Each farm worker participant that reviewed received a $600 stipend for their time participating. And then due to time limitations and how large the study is and how long it is, the review was limited to the most pertinent parts of the draft study report, focusing really on information about and provided by farm workers, as well as our recommendations that we had outlined in the report. And our team is going to do our best to incorporate the recommendations that the farm workers provided as much as we're able to. And please also note that we have not yet incorporated the farm worker feedback into the draft of the study report that y'all have access to, which Tim also attached again to the agenda for this meeting. So we have not incorporated this feedback yet that I'm about to tell you about. So this little report has both a key findings and recommendations section, which is kind of a summary of the overall points we heard, and then detail by each chapter that we reviewed with folks. And I'm going to go through much of it with you today. So overall, we learned that the farm worker reviewers appreciated the draft of the report and agreed overall with the content and recommendations. So we felt like that was a success. There are a lot of quotes, direct quotes from the reviewers in here that I'm not going to read aloud to you today for time, but I do hope that you have a chance to go back and read those so you can hear their voices directly. Here's kind of a compilation of content recommendations that farm workers had given us during the review. There was a concern brought up about the mention of the percent of workers who are unauthorized as a risky thing to potentially do. We want to pay particular attention to that, and we will be. There was also a request to add pictures of farm worker housing into the report to help demonstrate the urgency of some of the conditions of farm worker housing. I totally agree with this recommendation. I don't have any photos to include. If any of y'all have photos of farm worker housing that you'd be willing to share with us and give you a photo credit, of course, as you wish in the study, we'd really appreciate that if you are able to send some of those to Tim. Specifically, we do need pictures of farm worker housing in the study counties, and that's Hood River, Marion, Morrow, or Yamhill counties. We don't need all of them, but if they're photos from any of those counties, we'd really appreciate your sharing some of those. One reviewer in Hood River County made clear that it's really important to mention that every county has a different context, which I agree with. For example, that most workers in Hood River County tend to live in employer-provided housing. One reviewer in Yamhill County suggested that we also include information about the educational impacts to the children of farm workers. One reviewer asked that we insist and ask to pay more attention to regularize the situation of the workers. Another suggested that we add a description of the typical farm day or a typical work day of a farm worker. And another asked that we make clear that many of these workers have been doing the same jobs for decades in the environments they're in, which can increase their health risks. And this was specifically talking about from pesticide exposure. Reviewers also added a few more comments about additional solutions for some of the problems we had identified in the study, including an idea to reduce the amount of taxes taken out of farm worker pay as a way to help increase what they're able to take home and afford. Someone made the additional point of reducing the cost of housing in addition to increasing farm worker pay, not as standalone, but maybe as something together to help farm workers afford better living conditions. Someone suggested a counselor for folks to help overcome emotional or psychological damage. And another suggested an idea that farm workers only pay a deposit of 50% for their rental housing. There also, I compiled here kind of questions and suggestions for next steps that had come up in the review process. Someone did wonder about and request if funding could be extended to do the studies in more counties where there are also many farm workers and that need help. There was a lot of conversation about OSHA in the review process, which reflects also our interview process with farm workers as part of the study, that some folks were not sure what OSHA's role is, whether or not their housing is being inspected by OSHA, or how OSHA is held accountable or holds housing providers accountable. One reviewer had questions specifically about holding labor contractors accountable for providing good quality housing. And then a couple reviewers had questions about emergency preparedness, indicating that they weren't aware of or sure of how to handle emergencies at their housing. So there were also sections where folks provided formatting recommendations and caught some typos. And also there were some Spanish translation edits, and both of these sections will be taken into consideration and incorporated in the final draft of the report. So in terms of the detailed recommendations, I just want overall, as we mentioned, farm worker reviewers generally agreed with the study findings and our recommendations, but I wanted to go in a little bit more depth about that with you. So we had folks review in depth chapter 2, which was about the number of farm workers and their dependents. And our reviewers agreed that the number of farm workers is decreasing, which we had heard from both farm workers and from employers as well, and from agencies. They also agreed with the description that we included about why farm workers are decreasing in the counties. We also had the reviewers look at chapter 3, which was the demographic profile of Oregon farm workers. And one of the things that they all agreed on was that most farm workers are of Mexican heritage. We had folks look at chapter 4, which was the farm worker housing needs assessment. And in this chapter, our team assessed the need for farm worker housing by looking at 11 different areas. And so those are numbered 1 to 11 here. One of the things that we looked at was the affordability gap between what housing costs and what farm workers can afford. And our reviewers agreed that most farm worker households in the 4 study counties do not earn enough to afford fair market housing costs. We also looked at the degree of overcrowding, and most farm workers that reviewed the study agreed that farm workers often live in overcrowded conditions because they cannot afford the cost of additional housing. Importantly, we've heard also in interviews alternate cases. So one participant from Hood River said they had enough space in the on-farm housing provided by their employer. We also looked at the need for subsidized farm worker housing, and most of the reviewers agreed there is not enough subsidized housing to meet the housing need for farm workers, as we had outlined in the study. I'm going to skip over numbers 5 through 9 here because we'll go over most of them in the next section. But we also, we looked at the barriers and benefits of providing farm worker housing and had comments about that based on what we had learned in the study draft. And the reviewers in both Yamhill and Morrow County generally agreed with our findings that farm workers provide housing to help, or farmers, provide housing to help attract and retain workers. And some of the reviewers in Yamhill County agreed about the barriers to providing housing that is faced by employers. Some of the farm workers that were reviewing said it seemed like employers care mainly about the money. And one person had expressed frustration about employers' responses to the new OSHA heat rules. And this is in their commentary after reading the results of the employer interviews that we also included in the study. We also conducted a farm worker housing gap analysis as part of this chapter, looking at the gap between what's available to farm workers and what they need. And then, so we concluded from that gap analysis that the farm worker housing gap is essentially equal to the units needed to house nearly all farm worker households in Oregon. And that number we estimated to be about 66,269 households in the state. Reviewers in Marion and Yamhill County commented on this section and agreed that most farm workers cannot find housing in good condition that they can afford. We also had them review Chapter 5, which is where we really reiterated those critical issues for farm worker housing we had identified in our research and recommendations for meeting those needs. One of the primary issues is that farm workers have very low incomes. And one of our recommendations was to increase farm worker incomes. I know that, the farm worker overtime passed since this report, and that's one step in the right direction. But the reviewers agreed that farm worker salaries should be increased, and they suggested other social services that would help, including reducing taxes paid by farm workers, as I mentioned, increasing benefits, adding health insurance and vacation time to employment, and increasing access to social services such as food banks in rural areas or other ways to help them increase their incomes. We also recommended that there be an increase in affordable housing. Some of the reviewers agreed that more low-income housing is needed and none disagreed. Some agreed that government should fund more low-income housing and support new housing construction. As you might remember from the draft of our study report, we included a description of a lot of different types of affordable housing that we recommended that could be constructed for farm workers. Not many of our reviewers commented on those specific types of housing. One did say that they agree there's a need for more short-term low-income housing. One felt that it was good to see and compare what other states are doing with cooperative farm worker housing. And that was in reference to the case studies we provided about some of the farm worker housing cooperatives in California. And some also agreed with the need to pay for transportation. We also recommended improving the conditions of farm worker housing in general, finding that there were a lot of farm workers living in poor housing conditions that we talked to. Most of our reviewers agreed that farm workers tend to live in poor housing conditions, and many of them referenced poor conditions in employer-provided housing, which is similar to what we heard in the interviews of farm workers in the study. There was a lot of conversation about OSHA, as I mentioned. Some reviewers were unclear about OSHA's role in inspecting and approving housing. One reviewer in Yamhill County agreed that OSHA should increase inspection of unregistered housing. That was a large issue that had come up, is that there's housing that's not necessarily even being inspected by OSHA, and that unregistered housing needs to come into compliance. Another agreed with the need to review and update the OSHA housing rules, which sounds like that's happening. One reviewer wanted to know specifically how labor contractors who provide housing are held accountable. And there was another comment about pesticide exposure as it relates to housing conditions. And some reviewers felt that their housing should be farther away from pesticide use. And that's another reason that additional housing may be needed. We talked about the need to reduce barriers to accessing housing, and we described those in detail in the study report and asked these reviewers to review that section. And most of them agreed that it's important to reduce the rental application requirements and the requirements for home ownership for farm workers. One reviewer reiterated the need for social security numbers for farm workers. That was a pretty big barrier that came up in our interviews in the study. Also, we recommended programs to increase access to home ownership among farm workers. And our reviewers, we had agreement in all counties from the reviewers that farm workers face many barriers to home ownership. This is something that came up a lot in our interviews for the study as well. And there's a strong need, they said, for programs and services in this area. They agreed with the need for financial and home ownership classes, for example, liaisons who are not realtors that can help farm workers understand the home buying process, and giving preference to the elderly and single women with children. Some also expressed interest in the lower cost homeownership models described, such as the cooperatives. We had also heard from farm workers that in the study, a request for farm worker resource centers in the counties. Reviewers in Yamhill County were really supportive of this need in their area. One reviewer in Hood River County said there's already resources like that available there. And then reviewers in Marion and Morrow County, as well as the other reviewers in Hood River County, did not provide comment on that section. We had also recommended alternatives to employer-provided housing, and not many reviewers commented directly on this section, aside from agreeing that employer-provided housing is often in poor condition and that those conditions should be improved. Some of them agreed that employers and the government should work together to improve employer-provided housing that already exists, which is apropos to some of y'all's conversations today. We also recommended increasing the ability to collect good local data about farm workers and their housing. And only reviewers in Yamhill County commented on that section, but they did agree with the difficulty in collecting data about farm workers and the need for agencies to help support this effort going forward so we can understand if conditions are improving. And lastly, just briefly, we also asked farm workers to review the chapter that was the results of the interviews we had conducted with farm workers as part of the study. Overall, the reviewers generally agreed with the housing needs and preferences expressed in the interviews with farm workers. They, in terms of barriers to accessing housing, there was strong agreement from them about the barriers farm workers face. Some also mentioned discrimination as a barrier they face in accessing good quality housing, which we also heard in the farm worker interviews of the study. We had also asked about the life impacts of the difficulty finding housing and described those. There was agreement among those in Yamhill County that farm workers do experience those life impacts. We had asked about the impacts of COVID-19, wildfires, smoke, and heat in the interviews. And many of the reviewers talked about the loss of work and income because of these events, which is also what we had heard in the interviews during the study. And one talked about the health impacts of hazardous air quality from the wildfire smoke, which we also heard about in the interviews for the study. We had asked in the study about the conditions of farm worker housing. And as I said, most of the reviewers agreed that farm workers often live in poor housing conditions. The conditions of employer-provided housing came up a lot in our interviews for the study. And the reviewers, many of them agreed that workers are afraid to complain about the condition of housing provided by their employer. One reviewer did say they could see how it would be difficult for employers to provide housing as well. And importantly, one reviewer from Hood River County said they do not have poor housing conditions at their employer-provided housing. And it is important to recognize that we did have some interviewees through the study who said that their on-farm housing was in good condition. Also, we talked about pesticide concerns a lot with folks in the interviews. Reviewers in Marion, Hood River, and Yamhill counties agreed that farm workers are concerned about pesticide exposure, both at their jobs and around their housing, which we heard a lot in the interviews. And then we had collected recommendations as well from farm workers in the interviews for how to overcome some of these barriers to accessing good quality housing. And our reviewers were in general agreement with those recommendations made. Some reviewers reiterated that farm workers feel unappreciated and they are skeptical the government will help them. And that's all I'm going to go over in this today. There's a couple other sections on chapters 8 and 9 that were only commented on by folks in Yamhill County, but I'm going to leave those for y'all at another time. And I'm going to stop sharing. And the last thing I'm going to do is ask for your own feedback now on the draft study report. So we're hoping, as Chelsea mentioned, that by the 31st of this month, January, if you could please send any feedback about the draft that you have to Tim, please, and he'll get it over to me. It would be greatly appreciated. We'll send this back out to you, but we'd particularly like to hear your feedback on the following questions. 1, is there anything in the study report that you feel is missing? 2, is there anything that you feel is incorrect in the report? And 3, is there any context missing that you feel is important to add? We'll do our best to incorporate your feedback, and if we're not able to do that, we will respond to you and let you know why that is and kind of how we thought about it, but we will consider all feedback provided to us. Whew, so that's what I have, y'all. We are really close to getting this study out and getting it used. And so that's my part for the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that whirlwind of information and updates in your continued work to elevate the voices of these farm workers and their thoughts and concerns, Jamie. It's really critical work. And I know it probably, especially for those who've been around since this was initiated, has felt like very slow, long time coming. But I think the intentionality that approach is going to end up benefiting those who need it the most. So yeah, Karen.
Thanks, Jamie. Since the original start of this, it's been great that you've hung in there and shepherded. And as always, so wonderful to hear the voice of the farm workers. I have one question about the farm worker study. How many reviewers were interviewed and will they be named? And I'd like to know how many in each county.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, it's been great working with you across the whole spectrum of this study as well. We recruited 3 interviewers per county, so there were a total of 12. We're not planning to name them. They were confidential. Although some of them we offered to them, they took home with them the draft of the report. We printed them out also, which was huge, in Spanish for folks, and they kept them. And then some of them have requested that we send them a final bound color copy in Spanish at the end of the study so that they can have it for their records and distribute it themselves amongst their own communities, but we're not planning to name them, no.
Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions for
Well, look,
oh,
I'm looking at, I'm talking the chat here, and I just want to, oh, Jeff, let's see, I was about to go there. I want to just elevate, Jeff, I think you have a really great point in the chat, right? There's a lot here and that we'll need additional meetings on. That's the goal, that's the plan, right? And so I really think that, and I know that Tim and I have talked, and Jamie certainly has been a part of these conversations, that having a finalized draft of the study is actually really just kind of the beginning. And so I know that there's been curiosity, both from farm workers who reviewed the study, and I know that we here at this table, and even for Karen and Lori, who were early a part of the review committee, have long been thinking about the opportunity to do more of this in other counties. So I think I just want to, and Jeff, to your point that, there is a lot in there that we would likely need additional meetings on. And I just want to just be really explicit that that is the point. And I think as we, maybe I'm switching the agenda here just a little bit, but as I think about how we collaborate together to both hear from you all about form and function, all of the things that Director Bell mentioned in the beginning of the meeting, but also think about reimagining our work and what that looks like, right? That there's prime opportunity to utilize what we've heard in this study to have conversation and to really dig into the recommendations and to see what we can move on and maybe what doesn't make sense to move on right now. So I know this is kind of off the cuff, Tim, so my apologies, but I really think that that's the work that's ahead of us collectively together. So I say that to say this is not the end. Yes, we want to be able to finalize the draft study, which we will do. But certainly as I think about re-elevating and maybe reinvigorating committee work, I really believe that this is the work moving forward. And we're going to, I guess the last thing I'll say, like, this really has to be an all-in effort, right? So Jeff, to your point, there are some really great things in here. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, but it means that we should be talking together about how we do this. And do it in a way that's aligned and coordinated. So I think that I say all that to say I think that there's a lot of opportunity, and I think the time is right. So, Jamie, I appreciate you. We'll follow up. We really would love your thoughts, and we're going to hold fast to January 31st because we do want to be able to finalize it and really make this available to all of you, and just more generally. So. We appreciate all of you. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, Tim.
Awesome. All right. Now on the agenda, let me take a gander. We are going to be talking about the ag work housing tax credit, the utilization and overview. And Martin can provide just a very kind of brief comment on that. But just to set the tone, I think that the last meeting Peter asked and has asked earlier about going to the Department of Revenue and figuring out what are the growers doing with these tax credits. Are they transferring them? Are they utilizing themselves? Kind of what does that look like? So Martin, do you want to talk about that very briefly?
Sure do. Hello, everyone. So the response we got back from Department of Revenue was essentially to send us the 500-page document they supplied to the legislature during the long session about what tax revenues have actually been and what they expect them to be. The ag worker housing tax credit is mentioned briefly on page 145. I snipped that section out of the PDF, and we have it available to send out to the team if you'd like. There are a number of issues with it from a data standpoint. First off, they don't differentiate between on-farm tax credits and community-based tax credits because they can't really. Lots of farmers form corporations and then claim the credit through their corporations. Lots of and it's also important to remember that the tax credit, while it's allocated upon project completion, the person or corporation who receives the tax credit has 10 years to use it. So it'll always be a running figure of the amount of tax credits requests they have received versus the amount of outstanding tax credits over a rolling 10-year period. So it's not particularly helpful information we've received from them, and I plan on doing some more work with them to see if we can figure out a better means of reporting actual ag tax credit usage.
And to add on to that, when I spoke with them, I spoke to some Department of Revenue people. I had a couple of meetings with them. Ultimately, there's just individual taxpayer information that they can't share. They can't show where it's transferred because you may be able to identify who they're transferring it to or what that, there may be a relationship between who they transferred it to. So there's a lot of privacy concerns around that, and they just weren't able to provide that information to us. So we can certainly look further, but I don't think this is necessarily the avenue that's going to be fruitful. Yeah, Jeff.
Don't feel bad. Department of Revenue makes me want to ram my head into a brick wall every time I talk to them. But certainly we would want to help you tease out what the right questions are. With them, I have found that re-examining how we ask the question gives you the options of getting information from them. So Martin, I wouldn't feel bad. Welcome to the club if you've not done this before, but certainly we want to try to get at the root, like I talked about earlier, about why there's not usage and what's the best way for us to get the joint goal of this effort. So maybe the tax credit isn't the right way. But if you build it and they don't come, then that also tells you something. But I just wanted to volunteer myself to try to help there.
Yeah, that would be really appreciated. And as I mentioned in the chat, there's going to need to be kind of ongoing and continued collaboration around this. And yeah, I was hoping as a state agency to state agency, I'd be able to get some additional information, but they were very, very strict in how they discussed that. Peter.
So I know in the last time that we had questions related to the ag tax credit usage with DOR that the inquiry went director to director. That was helpful. To Jeff's point, making sure you're asking the right questions, I think is really helpful. So, to the extent you can use the expertise here within this group, I think that's really important. Sometimes the legislators have to ask these questions. I understand the concerns around privacy, and we don't want to know who. We just want to know that there are people transferring these tax credits. And so, some folks are making it work. And if there are some folks that are saying well, I don't know how to go about this, then perhaps we need to help them. I mean, we're all of these projects we develop for community-based organizations and housing authorities are tax exempt. So, we've got to go find investors as well. Sometimes those investors are, rich individuals. Sometimes they're a whole broad array of individuals. So we have to go through quite some machinations to put together purchasers for those folks. And so, if there's a way for the department to be able to help folks do that, that would be great. I'm hearing, I heard Lou say this, that farmers are saying it's too cumbersome, and Tim, you said it's too onerous. Well, let's look at what we got before we start proposing new programs. Let's make sure we've clearly identified all the problems. So I just want to say that before we start focusing on new sources, because if we're going to give grants, that's going to be onerous. I've never gotten a grant from any government agency that hasn't been onerous. It's onerous to apply. It's onerous to get it. It's onerous to report on the back end. So there's no cash transfer program from government to people that isn't somewhat onerous.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So yeah, let's move on. I think we've got about 7 minutes to discuss reimagining the ag worker housing facilitation team, which obviously is not enough time. And I think Director Bell probably hit the nail on the head best at the start, that this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I think to Peter brought up, opening the statute and including more, mandating more state agencies come. And Meg, just so you know, I sent out this form to everyone in the agenda with the agenda. It was the entire document. But yeah, I can resend out just the clipped 2 pages. But if you look at it, it's page 145, I think. Yeah, I think, a further conversation beyond just adding people or agencies to this group is going to be necessary. So I think we're going to be kind of partners about what does that look like? What is currently in statute? Because what's currently in statute is not heavily reflected in what gets discussed and decided in these spaces. So yeah, I think with that, I'm gonna.
Can I?
Yes, Chelsea.
Thanks, Tim. So I just want to, I want to just continue to reiterate a couple of points, both from Director Bell and from myself just a few minutes ago. We are deeply committed to reimagining this space, right? I think the times are much different, right? Than even 2 years ago. The world has dramatically shifted in the last couple of years. And there are many needs for farm workers that have remained the same, but there's a lot that have been deepened, certainly since the start of the pandemic and certainly before. So I think now really is a time for, and I think we've been hearing from many of you, the need for some reflection and a time to really kind of readjust and make sure that we are aligned, and that there's opportunity for folks that haven't been typically at this table to join and be a part of that conversation. I think I also just want to elevate, and Peter, I see you on the chat. I think it would be good to spend our next meeting digging into what reimagining actually looks like. So not necessarily bringing back specifics on the ag housing tax credit, but let's begin to really talk through how we do this, how we reimagine this space together. Let's also spend some time together talking about what we want to celebrate. I really hear that. I see that. And I think you all are right. We have to elevate what has been done. You all have put in a tremendous amount of work to ensure that farm workers in this state are safely and stably housed. And you're absolutely right that we need to elevate that. So I don't want to assume what those celebrations are. I don't want us to assume what those are. So let's make sure that we create some space to talk about what we want to highlight collectively as a team. I think we should do that together. And we can continue to, I really appreciate the feedback on how we gather more information, specifically for Peter and for Jess, around how we gather, how we ask the right questions. So I'm really going to invite folks, if there are specific questions that we should be elevating, that we can have a director-to-director conversation about with DOR that helps us answer some of those questions. Please let us know. We certainly don't claim to know all of the right questions. And that's an open invitation for everyone that's on this call. And I certainly think that as we continue to move forward and we have some additional agencies at the table, I think it would be I do think that it would be great to have some standing time for folks to be able to share from an agency perspective what they're working on. So I just want to acknowledge that that this is not a finish it all now type conversation, but that this really is the beginning, and we really are going to be looking forward to your partnership as we move forward. So much more to come. And Meg, I see you. Hang on. Meg, do you want to give voice? I just want to make sure that. Yeah.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Yeah.
I just want to reiterate, this is a combine of several organizations and individuals. And I think we have to bring subjects to be discussed in this and as a group. Bringing more people, like, it's like the more kids you have, the less attention you give to all in general, and I am the last of 6. I'm always fighting for, pick me up, mom or dad. I don't see much of conversation about community-based organizations, the challenges that we are facing. Thank you for bringing the subject, Martin, about, the work that you have been doing. I appreciate that. I'm gonna look into that document that Chin sent us. Just wanna make sure that, okay, who are those people that we are inviting? What is the impact on that? And coming what Lori say, let's have clear goals of what are we doing here. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Meg. I just want to note, you all are experts, right? And so if there are folks, organizations that you absolutely believe should be here that we are not seeing, please do not hesitate to let us know. We can always share the invite. So we may not know the spectrum of all the folks that should be here. You all do, because you all have really great relationships in community and with other agencies. And so we'll be looking to you all to help us think through who are the folks that really need to be at the table. And we'll also be looking to you all to help us do some invitations as well. So like I said, this is an all-in thing, and we certainly hear you and really want to bolster this table. So I really appreciate that, Meg. Thanks, y'all. It's good to see you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're at 11:31. I think this has been super duper productive. Even though she's not here, I want to thank Director Bell, Lou Savage, Jamie, for coming in and participating, for the growers, the developers, and advocates, for raising their voices. And yeah, I will see you all next month. Take care, everyone. Bye.